Hi again, it's Shamal here with Journal Your Christmas, and today I wanted to share with you 5 ways to use more pattern paper in your journal. If you're a little bit like me, you've assembled a collection of different papers to work on this project throughout the month and beyond, and once you get all the pieces cut for your album, you can find that you still have an awful lot of paper left. Now, there are lots of different ways that I continue to put the paper in, and I don't get upset with myself if I have leftovers that can go into my scraps at the end of the project, because I definitely assemble more papers than what could just physically cover all of the spaces. But there are 5 different tricks that I tend to return to when I'm finishing my book and realizing that I still have all that paper and I'd rather use it than feel like I have to hold back and leave it as it is. These are all sheets that I've already cut into, so I don't have any worry about cutting into a 12 by 12 and only using a little bit of it, because I've already cut different boxes from each one. So I'm going to share with you 5 different ideas. So I pulled out 5 different boxes from my album. So I have one full 6 by 8 page, 2 4 by 6, and 2 a 3 by 4. So I'll put 4 of them aside and show you those 5 different techniques. Now, they're all quite simple to a point where I won't use my trimmer for much here. A lot of it is stuff that I can do with just my scissors. So I can still do this even if I'm kind of on the move. I don't need to be in a spot with every single tool that I own. My trimmer is kind of big, so if I'm not at home, I tend to use scissors rather than my trimmer. Okay, so I had these 3 pieces in the pocket for this particular page. So I know that I'm going to use those 3, and then I want to bring in some more pattern paper. So one of the first things that I do is start to add strips at either the bottom or the top or the side. So let's pull out some paper. Because there's a little bit of green here but not a lot, I'd like to bring in a bit more green. So I'll go to this one, which is a green with little red stars and cream circles. And I can do this with my scissors because I can just follow the line of the pattern paper. So I'll make sure that I've cut enough to go across the page. And then give those edges a bit of ink to match everything else. And then there's a few different ways you can do this. I'm going to line this up against the top. If you like your pages to be quite neat and orderly, then I would suggest going ahead and adhering it flat all the way down. If you like things to have a bit more dimension, then you can curl the bottom edge just with your thumb. And you can kind of roll it. If you want to curl it a lot, you can curl it around a pencil, but I find this is enough. And then I'll run my adhesive right along the top edge, making sure I've got plenty on the corners so that it's going to stay put. And then I can line that up with the top. And because the adhesive doesn't come down the full length, and I'm sticking it at the top of the page, then I get that curl staying put. Now, once you put it in the page protector, it is going to flatten a little bit, so I over curl in the first place, and then once I put it in the page protector, it's going to flatten a bit, but it will still have some dimension. It won't completely flatten, especially if there's a few other elements on the page that have some dimension. If there's some pop dots or a brad or something that's going to keep the page protector from smashing down on top, that will help. It also helps if you just keep your albums standing up instead of flat. If there's weight on the top, of course, things are going to flatten, but if it's sitting like this and things aren't pressed together too much, then you'd be surprised at how much it will keep the dimension without any pop dots or anything, because it's a heavyweight pattern paper. So strips like this are really easy way to just add in more pattern paper, and you can leave it as simple as that, or you can take another layer and tuck it underneath. So just cut a little bit of polka dot here and add some ink to the bottom of this one. And then if you end up with lots of little strips that are scraps, you can do these, so I'll show you here. They don't have to be the full width. So you can do one like that and then take a different pattern paper to fill in the other section there. In fact, I might put the red on top. So you can do all sorts of little layers at the top of the page like this. And you can, it doesn't have to be the top of the page. You can put them at the bottom, you can put them on the sides. So one way to add more pattern paper, and the reason that this is a really easy way is because I can add this to a blank page and now build my page on top of that. Or I could already have quite a bit on this page, and if the top or one of the sides was empty, I could go back and add more pattern paper even though I'd done most of the page, or if I thought it was finished, but if it felt a bit empty, then that would be a way to improve it. So now I can go ahead and add my other page elements and be off and running. So moving on then, I'll show you the second way. So here I have a 3x4 card in a wood grain pattern, and I have one 2-inch square photo. And for this one, to add more pattern paper, I'm going to make a big photo mat that's basically several different pieces of paper stacked up on top of each other. So because this is a small block, the smaller patterns will work a bit better because it'll be easier to see what's in them. And it's nice to have a bit of contrast. So I'm starting with that red and cream polka dot, and then I'm looking for some other things that are a different pattern. So I can bring in some green there. With all the blue in that photo, it'd be nice to bring in something a little different. Actually, the craft would work really well. You won't be able to tell what it says, but I'm okay with that because there are other pages in the book where it does, it's more legible. So you can do this a couple different ways. If you want it to be really nice and orderly, then use your trimmer and measure out so that each piece gets an equal amount bigger and they're all very square. But what I like to do is just hold it there and hand cut the box. And it's okay if it's not perfectly square with the way that I'm going to use it. And then, actually I think I'll do the chevron in red and the polka dot in green. So then instead of the photo, I take that box that I've cut and make a larger layer and one more. So this is very, very simple, but I'm using quite a few layers of pattern paper. So I have 3 layers for this little box. I'll ink all of these edges, and while I'm inking, I'll add a bit of mist to this so it has a bit of background color. There we go. So that can dry while I'm inking all my edges. And then I can stack these all up. Now, if you've cut them all really square, you can keep them very square by centering each box in the middle of the last one. If you cut them by hand and they're a little bit wonky, then just offset them so that you make a messy stack of papers rather than something that's really orderly. But just keep in mind that it's better to keep the angles really small. Don't do something that jars too much. Keep it just really small, and then it will look more like a detail rather than something that's gone a bit crazy. And I didn't even realize that I was cutting out a whole word. I actually quite like it like this, but I have the photo, so it's going to get covered up, and maybe I'll use that idea somewhere else in my book. So now I can take that whole stack and just check to see if I've left enough room, and the red is just ever so slightly more narrow than the background, so I'm all good. And just looking at the droplets, I can figure out where I want this to go. Now, when I do just drops like that of mist on the background, I always know that I'm going to be covering up quite a bit of them. This is what I want, is this tiny little bit in the background, but it just works a bit better for me to just sprinkle the whole thing, and that way I have the flexibility to move it up and down in all different directions. So messy stacks as a photo mat would be the second way that I suggest going through that paper stash and adding a bit more. If you've already done your pages and you've still got that pattern paper and you're looking, don't be afraid to go back and look for a place where the photo is on its own, pull it up and just add more mats and glue it back down. No one will ever know. The third way I add more pattern paper is to look at the top edge of some of the elements that will be at the top of the page and see where I could add something that goes up off the edge of the page. It creates a really lovely look when your book's closed and you have a few tabs at the top. So these were the two elements I had in this pocket. So I have the date stamp and the 21 spelled out, and to that I'm going to add some pattern paper to go up above, and also a file tab sticker. So I'll start with this layer, and the trick is to watch the placement of your adhesive, so that if you get adhesive on this side, you'll want to match it with another tab on this side. Or you can just be really careful and not get adhesive in this part of the pattern paper, and then you don't have to put anything on the back. Especially if you're using double-sided papers. If this pattern had something atrocious, or it was just boring, a grid or something on the back that you didn't want, then add another one on this side just so that you're closing it all up. No problem. So I'll add a little something else. What other pattern could I add in here? Maybe some black and white. So just inking everything, because it's a great way to unify lots of different patterns from different collections and brands. And then I'll add in my 21. And then once I have 3 or 4 layers, I tend to add something on a pop dot so that I have a bit more dimension to all of that. It just helps it helps make the layering a little bit more believable in a way. Your eye is more willing to accept all those layers if it can see that in some places it does actually have some depth. So now with these pieces up here, I could either leave that as it is, but I also have this set of stickers that has all these file tabs that I haven't used. So I'll pick one of these as well to add in. You can finish the detail to this in lots of different ways. You can add stitching, you can staple through the file tab, you can add more twine around the different elements. I've got a little gap here, so I'll probably find a little word sticker or something else small and see if I can fill that. Just seeing if there are any that are handy here. Go. So I can just see a little gap like that and bring in a small element to cover that. And then I can use this space for more writing, for a photo. I can sometimes even just leave it blank. Maybe if I was going to have lots of other things in that particular page of pockets, if the rest are all very busy, I might just stamp one thing here, or add a little bit more embellishment to this so that it has some ribbon or twine, something that gives it a bit more dimension. And then I could just let this subtle pattern stay as it is, because if there lots of other things that are very detailed. Sometimes you need a little bit to balance that out and just give your eyes a rest so that you can take in all the details of the different elements. So when I put it back, and then I'll be able to see what else it's surrounded by and know if I need more space to put more writing here or if it would be better left a little bit plainer. So file tabs or bits at the top of your page is the third idea for going back and adding in more pattern paper. Let's look at a 4x6 block that gives me a bit more space. And for this one, I want to use pattern paper to give me a journaling box. So the first thing I have to look for is a pattern that's going to be easier to see the writing than what I already have in the background. I always think it doesn't do well to add something that's more complicated. I could write on top of the green polka dot, but it's not the easiest to read a pattern or read writing on that pattern. So I'll look for something in my stash of papers here that might be a little bit easier to read. Something that's plainer or something that has lines. I've got a few different options because one of them has a ledger paper as the background, or the B side of the paper. But I quite like this one, and I haven't used it. The red side is reindeer, but this side is just aqua Christmas trees on a diagonal, so they kind of look like arrows. So what I'm going to do is make a journaling box that's about the same height as the photo, but wider. So I'll just place that there, and actually the size that's already cut in there is quite a good match because that corner was a photo mat for a piece that was or a photo that was the same size. And now from this, I can have a look at how wide I will want this to be so that I have enough space for my journaling, but that it's not too big. And then I can repeat that same process of the messy stack, but in this case, I'm not just making a photo mat, I'm making something that's extended so I can add my writing here as well. So just choose a few more and stack this up and show you how it's the same idea but a little bit different. So here's how that technique works if you expand it so that you have a journaling box. You can add more layers on top, underneath, around. You can put pop dots under different corners to give things a bit of dimension. And then you can leave it as it is, or you can add more details. So I'll write my journaling here. I can then add stitching around the edge. I can add stamping. I can come in and tie all this with twine. Now this is one that when you look at it, it's definitely one that is better if you haven't done the page and you're still working on it, rather than going through your book and adding more pattern paper when kind of your book is already finished. But this is also one to keep in mind if you go back and you find something and you're not happy with it. So if you made a mistake in the writing and you really wish you had a second chance to do it, go ahead and make a box that covers up what you had already written and write it again. Then you get another chance and it's no problem. And you can just keep on adding more layers if the writing isn't quite what you want just yet. And that gives you a few more opportunities and uses some of your pattern paper. This uses a little bit more than just the strips at the top or a tiny little box. So one more to show you, and for this I have two of those small photos plus a 4x6 patterned background, and this time I want to put my scissors aside and get my punches involved instead. So basically you can take any kind of punch you want and go through your paper stash and start punching out some different things that you'll be able to use. You'll know which shapes you like from your punch collection, so you can punch the different things that you would like. So I'm going to use a big snowflake, and you can see that I've already used a small snowflake with this pattern paper. So I have that one in wood grain, but I wanted to try a couple different ones, and then I'll choose whatever looks best with this particular background box that I'd already cut, and the others I'll use elsewhere in my journal. Oops. I'll try maybe a red or something just so that you can see all the different options. So I think the wood grain, because it's a printed wood grain, is a bit too much, so I'll take that for a background that's a bit more plain or has a brighter color contrast. So the red definitely is visible, but I think the green is the winner because this pattern paper is quite busy with all the doilies, and the green is just a really subtle wood grain, so it's a bit easier to tell what the shape is. So I have my two photos. I have one large snowflake punch, and then I can either just use that on its own, or I can go back in with additional punch shapes. So I could take a small circle and layer it on top, underneath, all sorts of different things, or just place it in different spots. So one of the things I like doing with the circle punches is to take a circle punch and either cut it in half or fold it in half around a picture. And then you can even staple it or stitch it. And it gives you just a tiny spot to add a really small caption. So to make those match, I'll go ahead and do that with both of them. So now I have two punched and stapled pictures. I've got this snowflake that I want to use as some embellishment. I think it'll be a little hard to read writing on this doily print background, so I'll look for another pattern paper box that I could bring in there as a journaling box that's going to contrast with the different elements there. And then I'll be able to have a place to write and use the snowflake as embellishment toward the bottom. So adding a little something in a plainer pattern, this was a grid, and then I just added some stamping on top and looked for different elements that I could cut out from the pattern paper as well. So this was from one of the sheets, has all these little flashcard style words. So I cut out one of those and added it in with all the punches and just finished it off with a brad, and then I've got a little room here to add some details about what's going on with some writing. So 5 different ideas for getting more of your pattern paper into your book, whether you're just starting or whether you're almost finished but looking at all those different supplies that you still have waiting and wondering how you could get a bit more use from them. So 5 different ideas. Adding strips at the top or any particular side of pages. Using messy stacks with plenty of layers for photo mats. Adding different pieces at the top of your pages, and then you can add yarn and ribbon and all sorts of good things if you want a look where there are lots of different things at the top of all the pages. You can also do them off the side if your page protectors allow it, or if the page protectors are closed on the side, you can just add these sorts of things to the page protector itself. Making journaling boxes with plenty of layers and adding room for a photo and the journaling all on that same piece just to pull it all together. And then taking your punches and going through all that paper that you have left and just punching a bunch of the different shapes that you know you'll use and adding them to the designs and the photos and all the things that you have in your book. So I do think you can also use this sort of idea with all of your stash. It doesn't have to just apply to paper. So don't feel that you have to do one particular entry all the way to finish and then you're never allowed to touch it again and then you go on to the next one. You can do a bit here and there and go back and forth through your book and take your supplies and then spread them out. So for example, my next step will be that I have this many brads left and I've used a few but not a lot, and the reason for that is that I tend to ration my brads. For whatever reason, brads are one of the things in my kit or in my supplies, especially this kind of brad where they are all different pattern. I'll look at them and then go, no, I won't use that because I might be saving it for just the right place. Well, once my album is about half finished, it's time to admit that if there were a magic place that one of these was needed, I would already have found it. So now I can just go through and sprinkle them through all those different entries, and I'll be able to include them all the way through the book, which gives me more for my investment because I bought these for my kit this year. I'm really unlikely to use them next year because I'll fall in love with a new set of supplies for next year. So that's kind of my process at this point, and I'll just take one element at a time and go through the book and start finding places where I can add them to what's already there. I have some pages that are mostly done and some pages that I still need to transfer a few things over. So tomorrow I will be showing you my completed book as a little slideshow, and then also have a video on what to do if you only just started or not started at all and you really would like to make a journal, but you now are feeling that you've left it a little bit too late. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.